My son smiled when the lawyer said my name. Not because I had inherited anything. "You're getting zero, Dad," Brandon whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not a single dime. Go back to your rental." A few people looked away. Others stared at me with the uncomfortable pity reserved for a man who had just been humiliated by his own family. I lowered my eyes and said nothing. Because Brandon was right about one thing. On paper, I looked like a broke retired engineer who had lost everything. He was about to discover how dangerous appearances could be. "My name is Thomas Blackwood. I'm 68 years old, and this is the story of the lesson I gave my son after he decided his father was nothing without money." 3 days earlier, rain had poured over Catherine Blackwood's funeral. Catherine had been my wife for 40 years. We had divorced 10 years before her death, but the divorce had never meant what people assumed. We separated legally because her massive real estate empire was facing a lawsuit, and keeping our assets divided protected everything we had built. Privately, we remained partners. Every Sunday, Catherine came to my small apartment for coffee. She trusted me with every major business decision. We still loved each other. Brandon knew none of that. To him, his mother was a $28 million fortune, while his father was an embarrassment driving a 10-year-old truck. At the cemetery, Brandon blocked my path to Catherine's casket. "The front row is for family, Thomas." He had not called me Dad in 5 years. "You can stand by the gate," he added. "Tiffany is live streaming this. Try not to embarrass us." My daughter-in-law, Tiffany, was beside him, checking her makeup while Catherine's coffin disappeared beneath the rain. I swallowed the ache in my throat and walked away. After the burial, Tiffany shoved a cream envelope against my chest, an eviction notice. The apartment where I lived belonged to Catherine through a shell company. "You have 72 hours, Tiffany said. "That location is worth $500,000. Brandon placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mom's gone. Don't bother coming to the will reading tomorrow. It'll just be pathetic." They climbed into their Porsche and drove away. I stood beside Catherine's grave until the rain soaked through my coat. Then I took out my cracked phone. I called my attorney, Daniel Prescott. "They made their move," I said. There was a quiet chuckle. "Then we're green for tomorrow?" I looked toward the cemetery gate. "Yes," I whispered. "Initiate phase 1. I wasn't going to fight my son for Catherine's money. I was going to quietly show him that he had never understood where the money was actually controlled. And tomorrow, the first page of his perfect life was finally going to burn. The next morning I walked into Prescott and Associates wearing the oldest suit I owned. The cuffs were frayed. One button was loose. My shoes were scratched. Exactly right. Brandon and Tiffany were already inside, sitting with glasses of expensive scotch as though they were attending a celebration instead of a will reading. Brandon looked me up and down. "You look like a raccoon that got locked out of the trash." I chose the folding chair nearest the door. I said absolutely nothing. Daniel Prescott opened the file. "The estate of Catherine Blackwood has a total estimated value of $28 million. Brandon smiled. Tiffany squeezed his hand. Daniel continued. "To Thomas Blackwood, I leave nothing." Brandon slapped the table. He laughed. "Did you hear that, Dad?" I kept my face still. Then Daniel turned the page. "However, all assets shall immediately transfer into the Catherine Blackwood Protective Trust." Brandon's smile weakened. Daniel explained that the trust was discretionary. No beneficiary could directly control the money. Brandon leaned forward. "Fine. Who controls it?" Daniel looked directly at me. "The sole trustee with absolute and final authority over every penny is Thomas Blackwood." Silence. It was the most beautiful silence I had ever heard. Brandon stared at me as though I had suddenly become a stranger. I stood slowly and buttoned my jacket. Then I put on my reading glasses. "Let's discuss liabilities." The color drained from his face. "Brandon," I said, "you owe $2 million to a Las Vegas casino." He opened his mouth. I raised one finger. "You also owe $800,000 to a Chicago lending group." Tiffany shifted in her chair. "And you," I said, looking at her, "have 5 maxed-out credit cards and a forged second mortgage." Her face went white. "That's a felony, Tiffany." Brandon suddenly lunged across the table. 2 security guards stopped him before he reached me. "You brought security to a will reading?" His voice cracked. I adjusted my glasses. I learned from the best. His eyes burned into mine. "You can't do this to me. I didn't do anything to you." I slid a document across the table. "I'm simply enforcing the trust." They had spent 6 months living in Catherine's mansion without paying rent. so I changed the locks. The apartment they had taken from me would now be rented to the trust for $2,000 a month. Brandon stared at the papers. "You're my father." I looked at him. That used to mean something. Then I simply walked out. For the first time in years I felt something other than grief or humiliation. I felt control again, for once. But I knew my son, Brandon. He had never accepted losing. And when spoiled people lose control, they don't suddenly become reasonable. They become dangerous. For 3 days I watched Brandon unravel from a hotel room across town. Tiffany went online first. She cried into her phone, telling 30,000 viewers that her father-in-law had stolen their inheritance. "He's abusing his position," she sobbed. Donations poured in. Brandon called me 17 times. I answered none. Then he launched the real attack. A petition appeared in court claiming I was mentally incompetent. Attached was a doctor's affidavit stating that he had treated me for dementia for years. I had never met him. Daniel read the document twice. Then he looked at me. "They're desperate." "No," I said. "They're frightened." That afternoon, I went to Catherine's mansion. The front door was unlocked. Inside, strangers were carrying antiques toward waiting vehicles. Brandon and Tiffany had turned the house into an illegal estate sale. A woman examined one of Catherine's paintings. I called the police. Within minutes, officers entered. The buyers scattered. Brandon screamed that the property belonged to his family. The officer pointed toward the trust documents. Not anymore. When the house finally emptied, I walked through the rooms alone. Every hallway carried a memory. Catherine laughing in the kitchen. Brandon learning to ride a bicycle. Our Christmas tree beside the staircase. Then I opened Catherine's desk. The desk had a false bottom. I knew because I had built it. Inside was a letter. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. "Thomas, if Brandon ever becomes obsessed with the money, do not give it to him. Not until he is broken. Break him, Tom, then build him back up." I read it twice. Catherine had understood our son better than I did. That night, a blocked number called. A man demanded $1 million. "Pay," he said, "or accidents happen." It was the Chicago Lending Group. I immediately called Daniel. "I want to purchase the debt." He went silent. "You're serious? If Brandon owes them, they control him. If I own the note, I control the debt. Using my own savings, I bought the obligation through a holding company, Ironwood Financial." Meanwhile, Tiffany escalated again. She forged a threatening letter supposedly written by me and broadcast it online. She called me abusive, a narcissist, a predator. Reporters found my hotel. I ate my sandwich while Daniel prepared what I called the nuclear option. "Clause B," I told him. "You're sure?" I looked at Catherine's letter. "Absolutely." I sent Brandon one email. Immediate occupancy of the mansion. He read only the first sentence. Within an hour, he and Tiffany were celebrating. Champagne, music, victory posts. They believed they had beaten me. At midnight, the ancient boiler died. The mansion went painfully cold. Clause B made the occupants responsible for every repair. The next morning, another tax bill arrived. $85,000. Their celebration had only just begun. Their nightmare had only just begun. The mansion became a prison for them. Brandon and Tiffany had money for champagne, but not enough to repair a historic boiler, pay the new taxes, and maintain a property they had assumed would simply belong to them. Tiffany stopped posting glamorous videos. Then Brandon made another mistake. He borrowed $50,000 from a fourth lender and pledged Catherine's antiques as collateral. Those antiques were not his. They belonged to the trust. I quietly purchased that debt too. By sunset, I owned every dollar Brandon owed. I sent one anonymous message. $15,000 due in 48 hours, or assets will be seized. Their celebration turned into panic. But desperate people rarely stop at desperation. They become reckless. Through access I had quietly maintained. I learned Brandon and Tiffany were planning something much worse. They were working with the fraudulent doctor. Their goal was to create a psychiatric record that would make a court question my competence. Then they would seek guardianship. If they controlled me, they controlled the trust. That night, the plan came to my hotel. Police arrived first. Then paramedics. Then the doctor. Brandon appeared behind them, crying. "He's dangerous," he said. Tiffany screamed that I had a gun. She claimed I was hearing voices. I looked at the paramedic. He gave me the smallest nod. He was one of my men. I allowed them to restrain me. The ambulance doors slammed shut. For anyone watching, Thomas Blackwood had finally lost everything. 2 blocks later, the siren stopped. The paramedic removed his mask. "Mr. Blackwood, we're clear." Davis unlocked the restraints. Then he showed me the camera. Every word had been recorded. The fake diagnosis. Tiffany's lies. Brandon whispering that I would not remember any of it. Daniel and a notary were waiting at the safe house. The evidence was immediately secured. The fraudulent doctor was delivered to a police precinct before he could disappear. But I knew Brandon would not stop there. And he did not. Believing I had been sedated and taken away, he scheduled an illegal midnight auction at the mansion. Cash only. No questions. Masquerade theme. I arrived wearing a silk mask. Guests moved through Catherine's home buying pieces of her life. A Persian rug. Ming vases. Jewelry. Then came the centerpiece. Catherine's favorite painting, The Solitude. It had been legally designated for donation to the National Gallery. Brandon opened the bidding at $500,000. I raised my hand. 1 million. The room went silent. Brandon stared at the masked bidder. The gavel fell. Sold. I walked toward the stage. Brandon smiled. Then I removed my mask. His smile disappeared. "Hello, son," I said. And somewhere outside, sirens began to rise. Brandon froze beneath the chandelier, staring directly at me. His face seemed to collapse inward. "Dad?" I took the microphone. "Doctor, Eris is in federal custody," I said calmly. "And in 30 seconds you will have company." The guests began whispering nervously. Then the windows shattered. Federal agents stormed the mansion. People dropped handbags and raised their hands in panic. Brandon was tackled onto the floor where he had once played as a child. Tiffany tried escaping through a side door. An agent caught her before she reached the garden. Diamonds glittered beneath the tactical lights as handcuffs closed around her wrists. "You planned this," Brandon screamed. I stood several feet away. "No, son." He glared at me. "I just let you be yourself." They dragged him away. For a moment I thought it was finished. It wasn't. Several days later, Tiffany contacted me secretly. She wanted a meeting. We met at a roadside diner. She looked exhausted. "I can give you evidence," she whispered. "Against Brandon?" She nodded. "Offshore accounts. Hidden cash. Records." She wanted $50,000 and a good word with the prosecutor. I listened. I let her talk. And I recorded every word. When she finished, I stood. "You're not giving me anything," I said. "You're giving the truth to the people who need it." I walked out without paying her. Then I sent the recording to Brandon. One message accompanied it. "She values you at $50,000. Their alliance shattered instantly. Exactly as I had hoped. If they turned against each other, they could not stand together at trial. But I had underestimated how dangerous Brandon had become. That night, he found Tiffany at a motel. He attacked her. She suffered a fractured jaw and broken ribs. Police issued an armed and dangerous alert. Daniel called me before sunrise. His voice sounded different. "He's gone." I stared through my hotel window. "Where?" "We don't know." I understood immediately. Brandon had no money, no passport, no loyal friends, no inheritance, no wife willing to protect him. He believed I was responsible. A cornered man does not always run. Sometimes he comes back to destroy the person he blames. I checked the deadbolt, then pushed a chair beneath the handle. Daniel asked whether I was afraid. I looked at Catherine's letter on the desk. Not anymore. I had spent my career as an engineer studying pressure. Every bridge has a breaking point. So does every person. I had not destroyed my son. I had simply removed every cushion that had protected him from consequences. The debts, the mansion, the lies, the fake doctor, the broken marriage. Everything was collapsing, and Brandon was coming toward the final point of failure. This time, I would not meet him alone. This time, the police would be waiting. At 2 a.m, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy, then silence. Brandon knocked once. "Dad." His voice sounded broken. "You ruined my life." I said nothing at all. "You took everything." "No," I answered. "You took everything." Silence. Then the door handle moved. The chair held. "Open the door." I looked through the peephole carefully. Brandon stood there with bloodshot eyes and a swollen face. For the first time, he looked less like the arrogant executive from the cemetery, and more like the frightened child I remembered. But I could not forget Tiffany lying injured in a motel. I could not forget the fake diagnosis. I could not forget him telling strangers I was dangerous. Why? He whispered. I opened the door only enough for my voice to carry. Why did you treat me like I was nothing? He stared at me. You had everything, Dad. Once, that's what you thought. You had Mom's money. No. I shook my head. Your mother had money. I had her trust. His expression changed. I spent 40 years building things with Catherine. Bridges, businesses, a family. You inherited the benefits, but you never learned the cost. Brandon lowered his head. I was trying to protect my future. No, you were trying to guarantee your comfort. Sirens sounded in the distance. He looked toward the stairwell. You called them. Yes, you planned this. I planned to survive it. The police entered immediately. Brandon raised his hands. I'm sorry. Those words should have healed something inside me. They didn't. Because forgiveness is not the same as removing consequences. Brandon was arrested and charged based on the evidence gathered against him and Tiffany. The fraudulent doctor faced serious charges of his own. The illegal auction exposed the theft of Catherine's protected assets. The forged mortgage became another powerful piece of the case. The debts were no longer invisible. Every secret had become evidence. But I had one decision left. The trust still contained millions. Everyone expected me to keep it. Instead, I created a rehabilitation fund, not for Brandon. For people who had lost homes because of predatory lenders. Catherine had spent her life building wealth. I would use it to build something better for others. Justice had never been about becoming rich. It was about making sure the people who abused power could no longer use it against others. And for the first time since Catherine died, I finally felt peace. Months later, I stood in the same cemetery where Brandon had ordered me to the back row. The rain was gone, and the morning was bright. The ground was dry beneath my shoes. Catherine's headstone stood beneath a clear morning sky. I placed fresh flowers at its base. I kept my promise. I whispered. Daniel stood a few steps behind me. Brandon has been sentenced, he said. I nodded. And Tiffany? Cooperating. She'll have her own consequences. I looked at Catherine's name. Does Brandon ever ask about me? Daniel hesitated. Every week. I turned. What does he say? He asks whether you hate him. That question stayed with me. For years I had imagined revenge as making someone hurt the way they had hurt me. But standing beside Catherine's grave, I realized something. The most satisfying revenge was not watching my son suffer. It was watching him finally understand. He had believed wealth made him powerful. He had believed status made him important. He had believed his father was disposable. Now he knew the truth. Money can buy comfort. It can buy cars, houses, lawyers, and attention. But it cannot buy character. It cannot buy loyalty. And it certainly cannot buy back trust once you have burned it. I never gave Brandon the $28 million. Instead, the trust funded housing programs across the community, legal assistance and scholarships. Catherine had wanted her wealth to protect people. I honored that wish. As I walked away from the cemetery, my phone rang. It was Brandon. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Dad? His voice was quiet. Yes, I'm sorry. I closed my eyes. I know, son. Will you ever forgive me? I looked at Catherine's grave one last time. Forgiveness is something you earn with what you do next. There was a long silence. I understand. For the first time in 5 years, he called me Dad. I ended the call. Not because I hated him. Because I no longer needed him to understand my worth. Catherine had known it. I had finally remembered it myself. And that was the real victory. If you have ever been underestimated by your own family, remember this. Sometimes the people who dismiss you are only seeing the version of you they have decided to believe. They may mistake your silence for weakness, your patience for surrender, your kindness for stupidity. But consequences have a way of finding people who think they are untouchable. If this story gave you chills, hit the like button, subscribe to Dad's Cold Revenge, and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if your own family treated you like you were worth nothing? And remember, never confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes silence is simply the sound of someone building the perfect answer. See you in the next story.